All right, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon here. And my name is Odette Falone. I am Inspired Instruction's content specialist, as well as a consultant and coach. And I am here today to talk with you about setting students up for success on NJSLA-ELA. So we are going to be specifically focusing on the language arts section of the test. And I have a lot of great info for you, as well as some links and resources that we can hopefully put into play starting tomorrow. So as we go through, please remember we will definitely have a chance to ask questions. So if there's anything that arises as I share some of the information, feel free to jot it down, and I will open the floor up for questions before we sign off today. All right. So our objectives for this afternoon are the following. We're going to have four quick sections that we're going to be going through. The first of which is we're going to begin by just unpacking the assessment's components. So I'll share some of the assessment's blueprints with you. We'll talk about item types, what students can expect to see on the test, how long it will take, and so on. Secondly, we're going to discover some of NJSLA's instructional resources and talk about how to implement them. So I'll share with you again some practice tests, released items, and some of the tools that are available, things that we can use to help students prepare and get ready for the test quickly upon us. All right, got a couple more participants joining in. I want to make sure I admit them. All right, so thirdly, we're going to identify how to construct NJSLA-like items. So I'll share with you at this time different tools, resources that you can use to support teachers and students as they prepare for the rigor of the test. And finally, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're going to address any potential concerns or obstacles at the end of our webinar today. And we'll open up the floor to see if there's anything that you're still wondering, and hopefully we can get those questions answered today as well. And again, before I move on, I just want to make sure everyone is aware that as I will be sharing many different resources and strategies today, as well as links, let's say, from the state website and so on. I've prepared a nice little one sheet for you that our directors will be reaching out and following up with. So everything that I share with you today will be available for you on this resource that we will share at the conclusion of our webinar. So, please, again, make sure you look out for that. All right, let's dive in. Okay, so that first piece of our agenda, as I mentioned, is unpacking the assessment. So here we're going to talk a little bit about the testing blueprints, testing window, and I'll share some of the details about the task types and item types that students will be experiencing. So first piece here, our NJSLA-ELA Spring Administration Testing Window. So we're looking at about a little over 2 months to go as we begin to ramp up our preparations. The computer window for NJSLA-ELA is from May 1st to May 26th. And the makeup window goes from May 30th to June 2nd. There is a paper-based administration window that's from May 1st to May 12th as well. So mark your calendars if you haven't already. All right. Our blueprints are as follows. So there are separate blueprints for different grade bands. So we'll go through quickly each one that you see on the screen here and talk a little bit about the differences and similarities that you might notice. Grade 3 has its own blueprint for NJSLA-ELA. So what this means is that there are 2 different versions of NJSLA-ELA for 3rd grade, and students might receive either of these 2. So it's possible that their test one student's test will consist of a literary analysis task, which will be 75 minutes in length, and then a research simulation task, which is another 75 minutes in length. That would be the conclusion of that NJSLA-ELA test for one student. A second version of the test includes, rather than an LAT or a literary analysis task, that's where students might see a narrative writing task, an NWT. And we'll talk a little bit more about what each of those look like if we're unfamiliar. There they'll see the NWT and the short passage set that they'll be working on for 75 minutes and a research simulation task for 75 minutes. Something you might notice is that no matter what, no matter which blueprint a student receives, they will be working on a research simulation task regardless. Okay, so same amount of time for each blueprint, 2 units for each, but the only difference is one might include an LIT, one might include an NWT. And that shortened time frame has been adjusted recently, I think in the last couple of years. So it's nice to see third grade's test is a little bit shorter in length. And that includes passages being a little bit shorter in length as well for them. So we're, I'm sure that we're happy to see that. Grades 4 through 8 all consist of the same structure. So you'll notice that there are 2 units in Blueprint 1, and similarly to what you saw in 3rd grade, there'll be one with an LAT and a short passage set and an RST, a research simulation task. Time frame for 4 through 8 is 90 minutes for each. The other blueprint consists of a narrative writing task and a long or paired passage set for 90 minutes and an RST for 90 minutes. So again, we're seeing that RST, that research simulation task, is required for all students to take. It will show up regardless. So we really need to make sure that we're preparing students to work through and understand and be able to decipher what they're reading in those research simulation tasks. The last blueprint is for grade 9. This one only has 1. So all grade 9 students will have a narrative writing task and a long or paired passage set for 90 minutes and a research simulation task for 90 minutes. There's no guessing of what they'll receive. That will be what they see. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, well, where did that literary analysis task go for 9th grade? That will be what students will see on the NJGPA that they will take in 11th grade. It'll be aligned to the 10th grade standards. And so those students in 11th grade will see the LAT, a short passage, and an RST on their NJGPA. Okay, so those are our 3 main blueprints for this version of the test. And as I said, there's a little bit of a difference between the 2 blueprints, but one theme that we see consistent throughout is the research simulation task. So it's something that students will be working with year after year, and something that we want to make sure, again, that they are very familiar with. A great question just came through. If all students get the same, the entire grade level gets the same blueprint, or if blueprints are mixed, so students in the same grade level get different ones. I do believe they are mixed. So it's possible there would be a mixture of 2 different blueprints, in the same grade level. And that's a great question. All right, so our task types. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into what an RST is, what an LAT is, what an NWT is. NJSLA is full of these acronyms. There's so many. So, again, that's something that we want to become familiar with as we're using that language with our students and our staff as well. But there are 3 task types, as you saw on the blueprints. The first is the research simulation task. And I list that first because, as you saw, all students need to be prepared to work with this type of text and type of PCR. Okay, so what's included in a research simulation task? There are typically 3 informational passages. One of them might be media. So students might be, asked to watch a video clip or take a look at an infographic. But what we're typically seeing is that these texts are revolved around science or a social studies historical theme. For our 3rd grade students, there's only 2, not 3 passages. Okay. As well with our RST, prompts often asked for an integration of ideas between texts and media sources. So this is a common theme that we see across the board with all the released items that have been put out there, that they're looking for an integration of ideas. So for students to pull from all of the research that they're reading with each text or in media included, and drawing from that and using those pieces of evidence in their response when they're writing their PCR. Okay. Second piece is the literary analysis task, the LAT. So this often includes literature, some kind of poem, a novel excerpt, but usually it's 2 pieces of literary text. And these prompts often ask for analysis of literary elements. So they're going to be specific on what those types of pieces in the prompt at the conclusion of the LAT. I put that or in there because, as I said, although there are 3 types, most cases we will be seeing an RST and then either the LAT or the NWT, the narrative writing task. So students will not have a test that has all 3 of these tasks on it. Keep that in mind. So we do need to prepare them for all 3, as it's possible that they could have a different combination of each. But with the NWT, the narrative writing task, students are typically asked to read 1 piece of literary text, and the prompts very often ask for a new story ending or a story written from a different point of view. So if they've read that literary task, or I'm sorry, that literary text, the PCR, the prompt that they're going to be asked to write about, might say, okay, now that you've read this story, rewrite the ending in a new way, or take this story and rewrite it from a different character's point of view. Okay, so we want to incorporate those kinds of conversations with students and make them aware of, what kinds of prompts they might see. Okay. All right. So moving on, the item types. So this list includes 2 columns here as we have our evidence-based selected response. Another acronym for you, EBSRs. EBSRs are really a fancy way of describing a multiple choice question. Okay, and there are 2 separate types, and I separate them because this is something that we want to keep in mind. All LAT, RST, NWT, doesn't matter which task type you're working on, all of them, the first question that students will have to answer will be a question on vocabulary. So we'll always ask them immediately after the text about the meaning of a word, whether it be using context clues, whether it be identifying the meaning of unknown words. They're always going to start by asking them, what is the meaning of blank in this paragraph? And they're going to need to determine that. And then typically the part B of that question will be for them to select the piece of text or the section of text that helped them come to that conclusion. Okay, so we have our vocabulary questions, and then our other EBSRs might ask about elements of literature, main idea, key details, structure, and integration of ideas, as we talked about before. There's a couple different types of EBSRs I'm going to share with you in a moment. But also I want to point out something we might already know, but just to refresh our memories, since all evidence-based selected response questions typically have a part A and a part B, that's what the evidence piece is. That part B is where they're giving evidence for their response in part A. But something that kind of goes along with the scoring rules is that if the student answers part A correct and part B incorrect, they can receive partial credit. However, if they answer part A incorrect and happen to get part B correct, they don't receive partial credit because part B is always providing evidence for what they selected in part A. And if they got part A wrong, how could they prove an answer that's incorrect with the correct, evidence? So they're trying to make this test, really clear in terms of who has mastered a standard and who hasn't. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind with the EBSRs. Our TECRs, the second piece here, the technology enhanced constructed response questions. We're going to review each of these 3 further, but for language arts, for English language arts, we see a drag and drop, we see a drop down menu, and we see highlight or text select. Technology enhanced constructed response questions are really just questions that students are using a little bit more technology in order to give their response, more than just clicking a bubble to say, which one they select. So that's really the difference between the two types of questions. And as I said, I will share more with you there in just a moment. So I mentioned a moment ago our EBSRs, our evidence-based selected response questions, that there are two different types that students might notice. Now, of course, I said, okay, yes, we will always see those vocabulary ones. These typically have a part A and a part B here. But what you might notice that's different between these two that I selected from a text are the shape of the bubbles that are next to the letter. So if you look really carefully, this part A question has circles next to it. And this is a little tip that you might want to share with students. Again, this is an eye-opening thing that many students don't realize. And once they do, it helps them with making sure that they answer the question completely. So those circles are showing you that you select one choice and that's it. If you see a circle there, all they're looking for is one response. However, if you look at this part B, the question asks for two sentences. And then I look down and I see squares next to each of these letters. So when students see squares next to the letters, that's a signal that they need to click more than one. Okay, so if they happen to miss that it says two in the question, as we know, students miss things and directions all the time. Okay, if they do, then these squares might be a second clue for them to say, oh, wait a minute, I need to answer more than one. I need to input more than one response. Okay, so that's something that we want to point out to students and make them aware of this difference, because these two types will pop up at different times throughout the test. Another little tip that I always like to share is in grade 3, the question, if it's a multiple select, if there's going to be more than one response they need to put, the question will always say exactly how many for our third graders. It will say 2, it will say select 3, it will give them a specific number. In upper grades, grades 4 through 9, it may or may not tell you how many you need to select. Sometimes we've seen it where it says select 3 sentences. Other times it'll say select all that apply. Either way, you'll see those squares, so you'll know that it needs to be more than one response. Okay, so that's something they throw to our third graders. They'll always tell them exactly how many they need to click. Otherwise, it could be just however many that they, a student decides could be right. And in those questions, if there are multiple responses, as you'll see in these TECRs, there is opportunity for partial credit in these types of questions. Okay, so the first of our technology enhanced constructed response that I wanted to just share with you, an example of what it looks like, and talk about how we can recreate it as a classroom activity. Because I'm sure as you see this image in front of you, wheels are turning, right? We can take this question and transform it into something that students can do in the classroom without technology, so that we can practice the structure of the test. I'll probably say this another 3 times. The more that we can knock down any hurdles for students in terms of the structure of the text, the platform that it's used on, the tools that they're using, the language that's being asked in the questions, even just that tip that we said about the circles versus the squares, the more hurdles like that we can knock down for students, the better, because we want them to be able to get into this test, feel confident, and focus on the content, and not so much on how do I click and drag and all of that stuff. So this is first of which I want to share with you is the drag and drop, a TECR that students might come across on the language arts NJSLA. And here they would just be asked to click, drag these boxes into the graphic organizer below. Simple as it sounds, and with the amount of technology that our students use these days, I'm sure this is not something that would be overwhelming for them to do. But we want to point out a couple things. As you probably noticed, there are more options here to click and drag than there are boxes themselves. So this will be common. There's going to be more options than they need. So they really have to sort through and think about it. But something that we can consider is, again, practicing this type of question with students and recreating it as a hands-on activity so that it feels, like they're constructing something. This itself can be made into cutout cards and have students move and manipulate and actually physically move a card into a details box. Or if you print something like this out and number each selection, they can place numbers into the boxes just so they're practicing the structure of doing something different than multiple choice. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the scoring process for these, the students can receive partial credit if they insert more than half of the responses correctly. So in this case, there's 4 boxes. If they get 3 out of the 4, they can get partial credit for that. Same thing goes for these types of questions that include 4 selections as well. So this is another kind of TECR in which that students will have drop-down menus to select from. So instead of multiple choice, they'll provide them with some menus where they click. A few selections will pop up beneath or drop down below, and they can select from there. So as I'm showing you a few of these, I just want to remind you that you will receive from our directors as they follow up a nice little one sheet that will have links to the scoring rules that I've been mentioning with you. There's some great templates on there where you can recreate questions just like this with the content that you're teaching in your classroom. Use the text that you're using, plug it in, or create a question that looks like what students will see on NJSLA, but ask about the content that you're teaching in your classroom itself. So that's something that we're going to offer at the end, just for your use if you'd like to try to recreate some of these questions. So as I said, this one has 4 parts. If a student selected half, 2, or 3 of the responses correct, they could still get partial credit for that. Of course, they get full credit if they answer all 4 correct. Okay. The last of the technology enhanced constructed response questions is the highlight and text select. So how can this be recreated as a hands-on activity? This can be something that you use highlighters with. Just break them out, get a couple different colors going, and rather than having students, circle answers or write responses, they're highlighting in the text itself, just as they would here. So the question is vocabulary related, and then they're being asked to go back in the text and click which piece of the text gives evidence for their selection. Okay. So now that we've really gone deeply into the text items and some of the questions that students might see, I'm going to share with you now some tools, practice tests, and released items that are available for use. So as I said, all of these links that I'm going to share with you now will be available at the follow-up of today's webinar. So some NJSLA-ELA practice tests and tools. Let's take a quick look at some of what's available. So these are things that students will see on the test platform itself and can use as much as they'd like. The first is Answer Eliminator. The second is the highlighter. There are 2 different colors available, and I'll show you how they work in a moment quickly, pink and blue. And the last is a notepad. So if I went into the practice tests, I can take a look here as I click on grade 5. I'm going to just click on example test to quickly show you what those tools look like in action. And this is something that you could do with your students to get them used to and accustomed with some of the tools that they can use. So they're not just kind of fiddling around and using them, learning how to use them the day of the test. So Answer Eliminator is located right up at the top. They could click that, and if your students are comfortable with using process of elimination, they might cross out a couple answers, and it'll help them visualize a narrowed down selection for them. They can also click them again and remove. The second piece was highlighter. So I can just show you here easily. If I decided I wanted to highlight something, I could double click it and select the color. So I want to make that in blue. I want to make this in pink. If I want to go back and erase what I highlighted, I can do that too. But this is very helpful for a lot of students in order to keep track of things that they feel like they want to go back to. It could help them with highlighting some evidence that they might use later down the line in their PCR. So the highlighter tool is very valuable and useful, I'm sure we can imagine, in terms of having students use them while they're taking the test. The third piece is the notepad, which is located right in the middle there. And it is exactly as I said, just a blank notepad for them if they'd like to jot down notes that can help them remember things they want to say when they're writing their prompt essay at the end. You know, they can type in whatever they like and exit out, and it still will be there when they return to it. And again, this is for your discretion to, teach students how they might use the notepad in a valuable way. The last piece I want to point out before I get out of the practice test is there is a bookmark option as well, where you can bookmark questions. If you answer it, but you're not 100% sure if that answer is right and you'd like to try to go back and look at it again, you can return to that question to review later. And once you complete the test, it will let you know if you bookmarked anything or if you left anything blank. So definitely an important piece for students to have that tool. All right. So that is the tools that are available. And again, those practice tests are wonderful in the sense that it gives students a feel for the testing platform. However, the texts and the questions that are available there have not been updated in quite a while. So if you've been in there before, you probably say, oh, this is the same test that's been in here as a practice test for a while. That's okay. I have a lot more that I can share in terms of recently released items that we can utilize as well. But that is a great tool for practicing those tools and getting used to the platform and taking a test on there as well. All right, so some instructional resources that are available for us are the released items, which I'll share quickly with you, as well as the digital item library, which is my absolute favorite. But to start, we have this website, New Meridian Resource Center, which is exactly what I said a moment ago. Just all of the released items are available for you here. So you'll have the most up-to-date releases. We see some here already at the top from 2001. And you'll be able to print and use these paper-based tests and practice. If you'd like to just practice with questions, they all include answer keys too, which is fabulous. And you can narrow down, what do you want to work on? If you're working on literary analysis, you can click that. You can click your grade level and scroll on through what they have. My personal favorite thing that's offered on this site is the sample student responses. So this is a very valuable tool. It gives samples of students that took the test in years past. It'll give you the prompt, and then it will give you a series of student responses and the different scores that they obtained. I used to use this tool, frequently in my classroom with my students. I found it very valuable. It'll help them understand the rubric that's being used to score them. It provides annotations for why the students received the scores they did. And it was always fun to, post up some different samples, and they're anonymous. It's not anyone they know, around the room, and allow students to kind of be the teacher, use the rubric, score some students' writing, and then have that conversation about, why they gave the score they did. The better that students can understand the rubric, the better they'll perform on the test. So there's some really great resources on this site. I suggest that you check it out if you haven't already. The second piece here is the Department of Education's digital item library. It is an organized person's dream when it comes to identifying, items from NJSLA. And what it does is that it organizes everything by standard. So, and they also have it for math, but today we're focusing on language arts. But you can see here, we have standard listed at the top, exactly what the standard is, determining the meaning of unknown words, multiple meaning words, a very popular and important standard that's assessed for all grade levels across the board. So they have every question that's been released that deals with that standard. You can download them individually, or you can open them up and just take a look. Okay, so I see now the item that's being discussed there. The passage is here. Here's the item. And it has, again, throughout, it goes on down the line with all the standards that you could, desire to click through and see some of the released items that were. Okay, so a great tool again for language arts, but also for math. If you're looking for a good do now, that's a great place to look, and you can just pick on whatever standard it is that you're working on that week. Okay. All right, so our final piece before we get to some questions, I'd love to share with you some resources and strategies that we could use to construct NJSLA-like items. So not necessarily how we can test prep, but how we can infuse the test into our daily lessons, into our daily instruction, and support student success through confidence and through demystifying the test and all of that. All right, the first piece, before I go even, into constructing the nitty-gritty of constructing those assessment items, is this lovely quote that is very empowering in the sense of, the importance of what it's really stating. That research has shown that students' understanding of just 55 critical words contributes to 85% of success on standardized assessments that are aligned with Common Core. Now, I know in New Jersey, we're working with NJSLS, but as those of us familiar with the standards know that NJSLS and Common Core are very closely aligned. It's completely still relevant in terms of, what these words are. Marilee Springer is a noted expert on child literacy and brain development, and this is a quote from her. And she has shared these 55 critical words. So again, I've linked this PDF for you to access on that one sheet you'll receive. But these are words that are pulled from the standards. And as we know, NJSLA is created with the language of the standards. So it's no surprise that this vocabulary will appear in the test. So again, knocking down those barriers when we can, those hurdles while we can, use these words. Put them up on a word wall, use them in the questions and your assessments in your classroom, use them when you're speaking to your students orally, get them familiar, because it would be an atrocity if a student got to a question that had the word integrate in it and they knew what to do, but they just don't know what integrate means. So again, we want to make sure that they don't get stuck on these things because they will arise. She did a lovely job organizing these verbs by grade level. So you can really take a look at what's very important for you to focus on the grade level that you teach. And she even included critical nouns and when to introduce them as well. So a great resource, something that I always kept, on my desk, something to refer back to when you need to make sure that you're really, again, in your lesson plans, in your assessments, including these critical words. So keep that one in mind, keep that one in your back pocket when you are creating your assessments, that these critical words really contribute to a lot of the success for students on standardized tests. All right, so let's see. Our next piece here is constructing NJSLA-like EBSRs. So we want to try, as I said, to integrate these types of questions when we can, model some of our assessment questions after what students will see on the NJSLA. It's not something that we need to do for every single question, but to help you out with that, we have a document that, again, will be linked, that we pulled all of the Part A questions from our released items and created sentence stems or question stems with them. So we have question stems for grades 3, 4, 5. They're organized by grades 6, 7, 8. You see question stems all the way up to grade 11, organized by the EBSR topic. So if it's vocabulary knowledge you want to test, take a look at the question stems that are here. If you use that phrasing, you really can just assess students on what it is that you are wanting to use. But again, using the language or the verbiage that they would see on the NJSLA knocks those barriers down, right? So this is something, there's nothing better than the confidence of a student seeing something on these tests where they say, this sounds just like my teacher. I know exactly what this means, okay? So this is, again, a great tool to use in the future. All right, so having said that, something we want to also make sure that we do is if we are creating questions and we want to model them after what NJSLA looks like, we want to create plausible distractors. So what that means is we want to think about the wrong answers just as much as we want to think about the right ones when we're creating the question. So something that NJSLA says when they create their questions is that if, let's say they're asking a question about finding evidence in the text, if they're giving you quotes from the text, all answer choices should be quotes. They should all look alike. They should all be around the same length. We don't want students saying, oh, that's the longest answer, that's the right one. That's something that, you know, kids do. So we want to make them similar format as the correct answer, so nothing really stands out in that way. And then finally, practice using deductive reasoning to respond. So, you know, again, it's no secret that NJSLA is rigorous and it's challenging. We want to try to have students practice identifying those wrong answers sometimes first, so that they can make their way to identifying the right one. So a quick activity that might be useful in practicing that is giving students a selection, asking them, you know, a question, and then asking them for which answer is not correct, and have a conversation just based on this one question. Why did you choose that one? Why did you know it was wrong? And let's talk about why. So again, a great kind of way to introduce that deductive reasoning piece and have students practice that, where it becomes almost a habit for them to eliminate answers that they see that are incorrect as they're working through. Okay. Last piece here is bringing TECRs to life. So I know I spoke about this earlier, where I said, you know, it's a great idea to take test questions, make them into templates, you know, make them manipulative if you can. Even if you're using paper-based questions, you can model the assessment as you see here. So this is a sample of a technology-enhanced constructed response question, where there are 8 different boxes that students would be clicking and dragging different parts of the text into these boxes according to the titles of each. And something that we're sharing with you, a resource that we created to help with that, are some templates. So again, these are templates for EBSRs, the multiple choice questions. But this document, which we linked in that follow-up sheet, has 12, 14 some odd pages of templates that were created based on what we see on NJSLA. And, you know, they're fill in the blank for you as teachers. You can use whatever poems you're reading, whatever stories you're reading, whatever text that you're currently reading in your curriculum, and use these templates to create questions that look just like what they would see on NJSLA. And these kind of replicate what the TECRs look like. So some of them might be nice and easy for you to use as a fill in the blank, but they get the feel for, you know, what the questions might appear like. Some of them might be easier for you to replicate as a hands-on activity, where, okay, I could fill in some selections of text in these boxes, cut them out, and now I can give students this bottom part where they're literally filling in, maybe cutting and gluing, or organizing in a group, and then sharing out what they put in each. So you can take these one question at a time, and really spend a lot of time in familiarizing students with the format. And again, they'll see these types of questions on the test and feel like they are familiar, they're confident, they're ready. Okay. So that is, again, something that will be available on that sheet, a link that you can use that, download it, modify it however you choose, use it for your purposes. Hopefully that helps make things a little bit easier, because I know that sometimes constructing things like that from scratch can really take quite some time. All right, so we have reached the questions, concerns portion of our webinar today. I know I shared a lot of information with you in a short amount of time, so I appreciate your attention and focus with me here this afternoon. Is there anything that, any burning questions that may have arisen as we were going through, questions about structure, about, the tools, the templates, whatever come to mind? You have the floor. See, I saw a couple of questions pop up in the chat. I hope that I got to everyone's. Let's see. Okay. All right, well, while I will be here for any questions that might come up in the next moment or two, but before anyone runs off, I want to share with you just a quick survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. If there's anything, again, I'm going to put it right in the chat for you, the link. If you could open that up and fill it out for me, that would be wonderful. We'd love to hear, what you thought. If there was anything more that you'd like to learn that maybe wasn't covered today, we'd love to hear that. We will be following up with you and sharing that resource that I've been mentioning often throughout today's webinar. But my email address is also here on the screen, Odette Falone at inspiredinstruction.com. Feel free to email me if you have questions that arise later on. But otherwise, I thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you so much.